Yes, good morning, everybody. I hope you had a good night after a wild party yesterday night here in Dresden. And my name is Sören. Together with my colleague Birthe, I'm working for Technologiegründerfonds Sachsen, TGFS. We are a local venture capital fund in Leipzig and Dresden. We are backed by the state of Saxony and some local banks. Technologiegründerfonds Sachsen, TGFS, is a venture capital fund with a volume of 147 million euro. We invest only in deep tech companies here in Saxony. We have invested so far in more than 80 companies since 2008, and we provide equity financing and management support. Usually we invest some 100,000 euro in the very early stage of the companies, and now we want to share our experiences in funding and scaling up these companies with you.
All right, let's start with some definitions first. We will talk about deep tech in this talk instead of robotics in specific, so to have a more general view on that topic, on funding and scaling. But as both topics share similarities, I think that's a valid approach to go for. Second, what is deep tech? There are different definitions of deep tech. Generally, it can be understood as a solution that combines both hardware and software in an integrated manner. What's inherent to deep tech is that it comes along with both a technological risk and a market risk. So as compared, for example, for biotech, that has a clear market need, or for example, ICT, that has a clear technological foundation to build on, deep tech has both a risk regarding and uncertainties regarding the technological feasibility and the market viability. Throughout the presentation, we will use this figure that you can see here, showing the value development of deep tech over time. Deep tech, as already said, comes along with technological and market risk. So it takes a lot of time for deep tech to lift off, to actually increase in value, as compared, for example, to its digital brothers and sisters, which take less time to be on the market, to get to the market, and to lift off. To be more precise regarding the uncertainties of deep tech, generally, I just said hardware is hard, deep tech is hard. That is because it's often grown in a lab, taking years to be developed. And then the question arises whether it's actually scalable, whether it's transferable to the market from the lab. Second, once it is on the market, it's still uncertain, or when it approaches the market, whether there's actually a commercial applicability of that topic, whether it's possible to find a customer who's interested in that deep tech. That takes a lot of time to actually find this customer, and accordingly, it takes a lot of investment and high investment to come from the transfer from the institute, for example, to the market. And that's why hardware appears daunting to many investors. So I said that deep tech is hard, but does that actually show in the numbers? When we look at the numbers at the VC investment in European deep tech, we see that it has risen over the last couple of years, amounting to roughly 9 billion in 2020 or 10 billion, depending on the source. That is roughly a quarter of all investment in Europe. Where does that come from? In Germany, actually, deep tech investment is a little less than the average in Europe, and Finland and France are actually putting more money into deep tech as compared to Germany. And also, we cannot look at this rise in amount given to deep tech with a naive view, because actually we need to differ between seed investment and later stage investments. Because later stage investments require much more funding as compared to seed fundings. Furthermore, it would be interesting to distinguish between investment that comes from German investments, European investments, and investors from America or from Asia. Because actually we see in the early stages, German and European investors are quite active, but when it comes to later stages, it's all American and Asian investors putting money into the European deep tech sector. And lastly, we need to give attention to the factor that some sectors within deep tech receive more funding than other sectors. For example, biotech receives more funding because it's less risky than robotics, for example, which receives less funding. So with that background, and when we look at deep tech from another perspective, we need to focus on the ecosystem that has evolved around a deep tech topic. Because a deep tech is developed together with a lot of partners, and the tech transfer offices from those institutes, they have gained a significant experience over the last couple of years. So the risk in scaling, in transferring a technology to the market has decreased. At the same time, simulation, for example, allows faster design, build, test, learn cycles, shortening the time that it takes to go to the market. And lastly, capital is available for these deep tech, so decreasing the pain regarding the investors. When we look at deep tech at the full glance, and taking into account that deep tech is a topic that requires a joint effort of all partners, we can still see that there are two critical steps that a deep tech needs to take, two kind of valley of death, if you like, namely the transfer funding and the scaling. And these two we would like to share or take a closer look on. Funding deep tech. What we as investors actually look at is the team, the technology, and the market. And furthermore, the IP portfolio and the cap table. Looking at a deep tech startup, we take the ecosystem at large into consideration. And for the team, we look at who is in the team. Is there a shared or a differentiated skill set? Is there potentially an alumni pool that the team can tap into in order to attract employees that have financial knowledge or business development knowledge in order to support the transfer of that topic? Regarding the market, we don't need a clear use case when funding a deep tech startup at the early stage. However, what we need is an idea and kind of feeling for the problem that can be solved by this deep tech technology. Regarding the technology, what we need to know is, or what would be helpful along the way to build that technology, is whether you can still assure access to, for example, the labs or the facilities at the research institutes where you are spin-offing from, in order that you can develop the technology further. The point IP portfolio, intellectual property, addresses the point that in further scaling, or later scaling the technology, we need access, barriers to entry the market. So this is quite relevant for the later stage. Regarding the cap table, the capitalization table showing who has a share in your company, it's important that it's balanced. Because as deep tech takes a long time to develop, there will be many investors sharing high amounts of capital, and they need a place in the capitalization table.
Okay, this very colorful slide shows you or gives you an overview about the ecosystem for founders and startup companies here in Saxony. Yes, the slide is very colorful. On one hand, it's nice to have so many organizations and people providing support for startups. Yeah. On the other hand, as a founder or a startup company, you easily get lost in this jungle. It's good to have some guides for this jungle, like High-Tech Startbahn or Future Sax. Nevertheless, it would be helpful for the future if the structure would be developed into something less complex for founders to find their way straight to a successful company. Next. We are proud to have a high density of academic research organizations here in Saxony. All of them support founders and startups more or less. The technical universities in Dresden and in Chemnitz, as well as the HHL in Leipzig, they provide all the support that is necessary for founders, and so the output of startups is very high of these organizations. Other organizations like Fraunhofer and Saxony, they need to a little bit improve to exploit their potential in the future.
So during the step from funding transfer, fast forward to scaling a deep tech. So when you have developed your technology, when you have a business model that you developed, what really matters in scaling is actually focus. Focus on a specific customer, focus on a specific needs, focus on a specific problem to be solved. Knowing who is the innovator, who is the early adopter of your technology. It does not matter to an investor at that early stage of scaling up whether they have nice logos, your customers, but what matters is conversion, that you actually put your product, your technology out there in order to validate that product, in order to validate that technology and that business model. However, especially regarding the early majority, when you have crossed the chasm, you need to be prepared for long sales cycles. Especially in hardware, it takes like half a year before actually a material is proven, before actually the research facility of a company is so far to say, yeah, we will prove it we will test it in our product. And what you actually compete against is the status quo of that company in an early majority customer, because they are probably not aware of the problem. They see or they say, well, it's working. We don't need that technology. So it's actually the status quo that you're competing with. So in order to address the customer, in order to put your technology out there, you might need to develop a business model that clearly that shares the value, that has a clear design to value regarding the customer, that you share your risk between adopting the new technology and actually make a larger return on invest on using that technology. For example, by combining X as a service approach. And lastly, what matters in scaling is that you have a focus on your needs, what you need from funding, what you need from an investor. Is that a corporate investor, a corporate VC, or a VC that can help you best along the way to scale your company? Do you need a network? Do you need money? Do you need access to a certain group of people? And by answering these questions for yourself, you should decide on which kind of funding you need.
We are proud to have some strong industrial clusters here in Saxony. All of the companies you see here, they have a high need of deep tech innovations, including robotics. As a startup company, it's useful to maintain a relationship to those companies. Usually they are open for ideas. Nevertheless, it has to be mentioned that decision makers are usually located in the headquarters outside of Saxony or in the R&D departments. So that's sometimes not that easy for founders from that region to find access to those companies.
All right. So if we put all these threads together, if we look at it again from the top, we see that growing a deep tech startup requires the collaboration, cooperation between all parties, between all stakeholders that are involved in this deep tech, in order to enable the curve in scaling to be pulled towards closer to times, to reduce the time to market, actually. So a well-functioning ecosystem is actually the best indicator for a deep tech startup to grow. And still, the question remains, deep tech sells, but who's buying? Because especially here in Saxony, there's probably not the large company that buys this kind of technology. We don't have the headquarters, the research institutes here of that large companies to actually integrate these technology. So what needs to be done in order to remove further frictions along the way, along growing deep tech startups? We as VC investors, we're not 100% perfect, of course. We require better scientific or engineering expertise, or at least be able to tap into a network of advisors and experts in order to evaluate and analyze, understand the technology that is brought forward from research institutes. It's also helpful if you as a team are able to tap into a pool of alumni to get the important first employees in your company. And on the later stage, we should grow a portfolio of deep tech savvy corporates that are able to actually integrate and accelerate the go-to-market of deep tech startups in order to prevent the pilot purgatory, the point that a deep tech startup, that a company says yes to a deep tech startups and then nothing happens, because that happens to too many startups. And lastly, if we consider Saxony to be a deep tech startup itself, we would say that Saxony has managed to execute the transfer, to step onto the market, to actually show its potential in research, in technology. And now it's time to further grow in order to, and further scale in order to show that what Saxony has developed in the past. And therefore, we need a higher visibility of Saxon-based ventures, both on the national and international level. And we need access to crucial funding and large companies in order to grow, in order to step up to the national venture capital centers like Berlin or Munich, for example, but with our own potential with regards to deep tech and tech. If you want to discuss this topic of funding and scaling startups and tech startups, deep tech startups in Saxony further, we will be here today, and we're happy to discuss anything regarding this topic with you.